Questions for him as well?
No, I'm good.
But I'll ask him. He'll make sure to share. And we're recording it too, so it'll be taken care of. They're just asking if you can share your slides.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So thank you to Mina and.
So thank you guys so much for inviting me to be here. I got excited when I heard about the topic because I think it's really great that like as a church we want to focus on people who are not like physically right in front of us and people who are lost. So like we heard here, so one of the blessings that I have is to get to focus on things from a spiritual as well as psychiatric perspective. So we're going to share, some things will be verses, some things will be a little technical. If you have a question at any point, please just raise your hand and say this makes no sense, tell me what the heck you're talking about, because this is already like maybe an unfamiliar topic. In some ways we see it every day, right? Like raise your hand if you know of anybody around you who like has any interaction with substance use. Okay? It's 100% of us, 100%. And we're not unique in the sense that like now the country is really kind of jumping into that phenomenon too. So that's why we're talking about it for multiple reasons. Okay, so in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, God, amen. And here we go. So what's our focus today? What are we going to try to do? We're going to try to understand what addiction actually is. We're going to try to think about like strategies for how do I talk to someone who's dealing with this stuff. Usually, like when I'll give you stories from my own like high school times when I like, you know, like every high school kid, like, oh, I'm just curious, like, what are drugs? You know, what are those things? And if somebody talks about it to you in a certain way, it can leave a lasting impression. So you guys as servants, when you're reaching out to someone, like, what are the ways that we can help walk somebody through that situation? And understand how to connect someone to professional help. That's a big question for us too, is like, okay, so we're doing our best as servants. There's a role that we have that nobody else has. There's a role that you have that no other professional in the world can fill. Does that make sense? So we want to understand the whole big picture of this is that for us to see people or to see people, to find people who are lost, it takes a team, it takes a village. And part of the team is a servant, part of the team is connecting maybe to something else. Make sense so far? Our first kind of theme verse that I wanted to share with you, or actually before we get to the theme verse, when you think about this, like somebody drowning in this like 1980s little icon here that I have, okay? Think about somebody struggling with substance use, like a lost kid. Is this a spiritual problem? Yes or no? Yes. There's a spiritual component. Very good. Is this a physical problem? Is this a physiological problem as well? Yes. A lot of nods for yes. Very good. Is this potentially an emotional problem? Like maybe there's something else going on, like emotionally? Yes. Okay. So I don't even have to get into this because you got the right thing. Is this sometimes we separate this and say, oh, it's just a sin. Historically, when people look at addiction and they look at us in the church, they say, you guys don't really get it. And they make fun of us and say, like, you just think about it as like addiction is a sin. So repent and stop sinning. Right? And we say now we're responding like, no, that's not the way we understand even sin as Orthodox people. Right? Unless, like, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody here go to confession once and like really nailed it? Since then, it's like, I'm cool, man. One time I went to confession in 1998, and I was like, really got that absolution. It was solid, right? We don't think about it that way. We know, as Orthodox people, that it's a life of repentance and purity, right? Like Pope Shenouda tells us. So we get that it's not just this. The medical world sometimes does the opposite. It's like, okay, you know what? Forget the church. Forget the community. All you really need is a medicine. Medicine has all the answers. That's why it's a funny doc with giving that perspective. And sometimes it's like, no, the shrinks say, no, the problem is like your mom. Tell me about your mom when you were 6. And we're going to get into like psychological, right? And at the end, the person's like, I don't care what you think it is. I don't care if you think it's my mom, and my mom is fine, or I took meds, or I took communion. Like, I'm still dying. I'm still like, help me, you know? So for us to really do this well, one thing we got to agree on off the bat is that we're not going to take one little side. We're not going to say it's just this, it's just that, with all of these things together. Cool? That's the thing. There's a personality component, there is a physical component, there's a spiritual component, and it sounds like solid. We're on the same page with that, so I won't have to belabor it for you. Here's the verse that I want us to think about. It's a verse that's like, doesn't get a lot of airtime. You know, it's not like as popular as the rest of the Bible. I don't know, I feel like that. Do you remember Jude? Is that like a book that comes off the top of your head as servants, right? Let's be real. There's some things that we know better than others. Maybe you guys know better than me. I'm just kidding. I don't know. So he says this. He says, look, but you, beloved, building up for yourselves up on the most holy faith, praying in the Holy Spirit, keep yourselves in the love of God, looking for the mercy of our Lord Jesus Christ unto eternal life. The reason why this is the basic for us is because the same way that we think about salvation, like how are we saved? Ultimately by the mercy of God. How will lost people be saved? How will lost people become a part of the community? By the mercy of God, by the love of God. If we're not going to approach things with the love of God, let's just close up shop and like play ball. I think there's a gym on the way to the bathroom. It was really nice. But here's the big thing for us. Here's the thing that I really want you to catch and not miss for this entire talk, okay? And there aren't going to be like a whole bunch of verses. This is just an important one. So just remember this one. If there's a memory verse, like, oh, I learned a verse from Jude. Here it is, okay? On some have compassion, making a distinction. On some have compassion, making a distinction, but others with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment defiled by the flesh. Why is this important? One of the most important virtues that you get as a servant, and what God gives us, hopefully in time, as he grooms us and prunes us and like really gets us to grow, is to understand this idea of making a distinction. Sometimes, if you don't make a distinction, you treat everybody with the second highlight, pulling them as if out of a fire. Some kid says, a friend of mine talked about like using a vape. It's saving them with the fire. And throw the kid, and like, are you crazy? Vaping, your lung is gonna explode, and like, Not saying that vaping is not something that's serious. It's serious. Kid says, a friend of mine mentioned weed. Fire. The reason this is important is because if we can understand, I'm not trivializing weed or trivializing vaping, right? You understand what I'm trying to say. Is that when it comes to this stuff, when it comes with dealing with, and I'll tell you the other piece of like the intro that's relevant for this, is that before I had a chance to go into residency training and do all this stuff, and now we're part-time for Columbia, part-time in a private practice. I see like teenagers, and I see adults. I try to anyway, try to see them. Hopefully they can see me. I mean like understand them. So, because teenagers are hard to understand, is that right? Wait, is that just me? So, part of what I got to do before that is I spent 2 years focusing on two things in the church. One is helping build a free mental health center. You guys know about St. Luke's in Cedar Grove. And the second thing is trying to reach out to people who are the most lost in society. Who's the most marginalized? Who's someone that would hate talking to Christians? And one of the things I learned in those 2 years is if you don't make a distinction, if you don't meet someone where they are first to understand what is it that you understand about God, what is it that drugs are doing for you as an individual, you're never going to get it right. If I assume, wow, you're smoking a whole bunch of weed every day, must be because nobody loves you at home. Maybe, or maybe not. If I assume, wow, this kid now is addicted to prescription drugs, just popping Percocets all day, it must be because, no, I don't know. I make a distinction. With some, I'm going to have compassion, and I'm going to be patient. I'm going to say, in your setting, the other relevant piece for this is when we think about treatment, when we think about how do we, as servants, bring treatment to somebody, not everybody is going to jump into a rehab facility tomorrow. And that's okay, and there are ways to address that. So as a big foundational piece, does this make sense? For some people, we got to sound the alarm. This is a fire. I'll confess to you something, because I didn't actually do it. I just thought about it. That's a little confession. Okay, when I was in high school, as a genius high school kid, just really just the neurons were flowing and just aspirations were really high. So I hear about drugs. Real talk, I hear about drugs. A specific drug that sounded really cool. And I was like, wow, maybe I should try drugs. Sounds like a good way to start a talk, doesn't it? And one of my servants, thank God for her, she pulled me out of the fire. She's like, Mina, you idiot. I said, that's very spiritual. Well, my name is Mina Merholm. You should be very nice to me. I'm a 16-year-old, aspiring young physician. And she was like, no, you're an idiot. If you do this, this is going to ruin your life and you're going to die. And that took me, let me take a step back and say, okay, so maybe I'm not going to do drugs. That worked for me for 1 second. That same approach didn't work for somebody else that's in my same group of friends who now is struggling in a lifelong way with substance use. Does that illustrate my point? That person maybe needed more of a compassion, okay, you're dealing with this, What is it doing for you? Okay, there's something going on that's further beneath the surface. How do we address that something? Cool? So our theme will be that we will make a distinction. We will work with the love of God. We will rely on the mercy of the Lord. How common is this? Some things I'm gonna slide over quickly. I just want to have them for you for content so you know. Anybody think this is like a rare occurrence, substance use, addiction? None of us, right? Like we said in the beginning, 100% of us have seen it. How common is it though? Huge. We're talking about 30% of Americans. That's millions and millions of people. Most common, what's the most common substance that's abused in America? Any thoughts? Any guesses? Alcohol. Very good. Very good. Huh? Absolutely, yes. Because it's the most available, so it's the most abused. Good. But also now, as you know, especially in New Jersey, but also throughout the country, we're in the middle of an epidemic, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the point here is that these are unfamiliarly and uncomfortably common. The cost burden, and sometimes I give these slides to people who are in primary care to understand that this is having a huge cost impact on the country as well. The reason why that matters for us is when something has a huge cost impact on the whole country, it means the resources are being pulled into it. It means that we don't have to sometimes, I was at a dinner last week and one server from another church came to me very passionate. He was like, Mina, hi. He said, we have to open a Coptic rehab. I said, yes, but why? He said, because there's a huge Coptic problem of substance use. I said, that's true, but there's a lot of resources already available. Sometimes when we as Coptic people, we struggle with a crisis, we say, we must create, and if you want to create one, that's okay. I just know we are really thirsty, we must create Coptic water. It's going to be blessed, it's going to be like having holy water all year. Imagine for every meal, it's just holy water. There's $1 billion idea. Coptic people will eat it right up. But that's not always the solution for us, right? We don't have to create everything. Coptic granola bars, Coptic water, Coptic village. So what I'm saying is that if you open a Coptic rehab center, that would be great. I'm not discouraging this person because I love him. He's a guy with great passion. But what I'm saying is we don't have to necessarily invent every single wheel. Huge cost burden. Here's the big thing, though, that I want to tell you is that even though it's incredibly common almost everywhere, even though it's incredibly costly, most people, when they have an issue, who do they talk to? Not their doctor, not a therapist, not a mental health professional. If, according to research, I didn't put this on the slide, but it's another cool study. If somebody in the church is struggling with these things, mental health stuff, substance use stuff, what's the first place they go to? Church. Church. If there's a parent that's going to come to you, pull you aside and say, help me, my kid is this, right? You experience this. So oftentimes, a servant one time told me this. She was serving somebody who was dealing with a serious substance use issue, and the mom called her before she called 911. The kid OD'd, and she called her first. She's like, why are you calling me? Calling what? I'm a servant in the church, Basiani. Does that sound familiar? Right? This is also your experience. So now we get to the question of, all right, people aren't talking to professionals and they're talking to us. What do? We're not always equipped for this, right? And that's, I guess, part of the reason why we're here. But I'm just reinforcing it for you, is that oftentimes it's not discussed with a professional, and oftentimes less than 10% of the people who need this help are actually getting it. So part of our role, part of our opportunity is not to invent the resources, but to recognize and to connect. Recognize what's going on, see what can I do in that situation, and how do I connect you to more stuff. The same way that if a kid comes to you and says, oh, I don't know, I feel like when I'm playing ball, I'm wheezing a lot. You're not gonna okay, let's pray about your wheezing. No, okay, I recognize this sounds a little weird. I gotta find somebody who specializes in wheezing. Could be something going on. Maybe a doctor, and we'll get you help. Make sense so far? The other thing that we know is that the people that you guys are serving, adolescents, are in the second huge, critical period in their life in terms of brain development. The brain is changing a whole lot, so these substances have a huge impact. This is one of the things I'm not going to belabor as much, but I want you to kind of be aware of. Quick thing about, any questions so far? About the approach? Yes.
What's considered alcohol abuse in terms of like the medical standard?
Yeah, good question. What fits criteria for alcohol abuse or alcohol use disorder is the term that we're talking about now. So actually a lot of people that you know would fit into that category. Remembering off the top of my head, it's a certain amount, let's say in one setting, having more, the screening questions that you would ask, do you have more than 3 drinks, let's say, in a setting? People will say, like a lot of young people that you know would meet criteria for like a binge drinking disorder. They're not drinking every single day, right? That's what you're talking about when it comes to adolescence. But when they drink, these are a lot of the kids that I see, oh, I'll go out. No, I don't drink that much. How much is not that much? Or I'll go out on a Friday and black out. Or I'll go out on a Friday and I'll have 4 or 5 drinks. Then you're talking about, you're meeting criteria really for a binge drinking disorder, for an adolescent. When you're talking about adults, one thing that you're going to be considering for criteria is how it's impacting function. Because they've broadened kind of the criteria for alcohol specifically, because it used to be that, okay, like there has to be like a law piece involved, like you got a DUI or something, or there has to be that this many days of continuous use. The biggest kind of simple definition that I want you to think about, biggest simple way to think about substance use, is that using a substance even despite the direct negative consequences of that substance on your life as a whole. So you're drinking and you're still going to work, but now you're beginning to lose your relationships. You're drinking and you're still kind of functioning, but now you're having issues at work. You're drinking and you're still kind of pushing through, but you did get a DUI. So using it despite the negative possible consequences involved. Does that kind of make sense?
So if you're an adult and you just like you work fine the whole week and you just wait till the weekend to like black out or whatever, and then you start over in the week, like not drink during the week, but party or whatever, drink. That's still for an adult considered?
It is.
It's like an addiction, binge drinking is addiction?
It is. Yeah, and the reason for that is because, like they've studied this too, like the impact of binge drinking, let's say once a weekend, on you emotionally, physically, long term. People don't often recognize it that as such, because even though I've had people come to me, patients say, okay, I'll binge drink on the weekend, and like I will feel like withdrawal symptoms the next day, or withdrawal symptoms on Sunday, but it kind of goes away. It's fine. It's all right. I just kind of deal with it, and then the next weekend do something. Okay. And what's the relevance of like fitting a diagnosis, fitting a criteria? Is to tell someone first, you recognize it so you can engage with them about like, oh, hey, like maybe this is something that we can talk about, right? And then knowing that there is a way to address that, because that's actually a perfect example. Someone who's just binge drinking on weekends is not going to go to detox. Not going to go to rehab. Someone who's a professional, maybe a lawyer or a doctor. Oh, these are people that I treat as well. I'm a doctor and I do fine, but on Friday nights, it's total blackout time. They're not going to stop whatever they're doing and go to rehab. But there's other ways, medication-wise and the community-wise, that you can be able to treat that. It's a good question. Okay. So this is just a little bit of a heads up about, anybody seen this before? Anybody familiar with one person? 2 people? 3 people. Anyone else? Okay. So there is a concept here. We're talking about that there is a physical component to this in the brain of a reward pathway. Why does this matter? Is to know that the kid you're dealing with is not just like, oh, I just feel like using the substance, whether it's alcohol or something else. But there's something that's reinforcing in the brain that's saying, you got to do this because when you did it last time, it was amazing. You got to do it again. So these are kind of the brain structures, and it's cool. What's cool is that basically they've mapped it out specifically. You know, in this little area, it's giving out this little signal, this other little area, and saying, this must be done above everything else. I had someone who was struggling with substance use once tell me, you know what stopping a substance is like? It's like trying to hold your breath. You're really trying to hold your breath? You can do it for a while. But if you're just trying to hold your breath, it's not going to work. Does that make sense? So this is what I'm driving for you here, the physical component, whether it's alcohol, marijuana, heroin. And I remember somebody telling me recently, who was like an expert on this stuff, is in order of magnitude, like the numbers, like if you have to put a quantifiable number, say like, you know, you're in like a dope this bad, okay? It's just our drug of choice. And you feel like an effect of like, man, there's like dopamine released in the brain, Because sometimes if you do any pleasurable activity, anything awesome, like yak, okay, the body will release an actual chemical that says, this is great, we want to do this again. Remember this one, this is a good one. Let's say that number is like 10. Let's say something really amazing meal is like 6. Something like some of these drugs, like crystal meth, is like 5,000. So the physical hit on the brain that you're fighting against as a servant is astronomical. It's enormous. For that reason, again, it reinforces the fact like, oh, we can't do this alone because the brain is going to overpower whatever it is that we're trying to do. Make sense? I was kind of blown away with the, even though it's not an exact number, with the kind of analogy. Like an amazing experience is like single digits. Some of these drugs can be hundreds. Crystal meth is kind of the exception, being the thousands, but same with heroin, cocaine, things like that. Way higher of a release of dopamine, way higher of kind of an endorphin, like stimulating euphoric effect. So that's why we talk about trade-off. We're not going to be able to talk to somebody and say, oh, like, if you pray, you're going to feel just as good as you did when you used that drug. Yes?
Sorry, I just got a question about these drugs. Like, is it always like they're addicted, just like crystal meth or heroin? Is it like from the moment they start they're addicted, or is there like a lag phase where they might start and they still have a chance of like not being addicted?
Yeah, good question. Good question. In case you didn't hear it, is it always like you use something and you're addicted automatically, or
Like
is there
these hard
time?
drugs.
Hard drugs, yeah. So, no, not always. I'll give you the example. Is that maybe you and I have knee surgery, and we get prescribed a very powerful addictive narcotic. We use it because we have knee pain, and we stop using it because we no longer have knee pain. These narcotics are very powerful. They're the reason why there's a common narrative where people go with these prescribed narcotics and then into heroin is because they're very similar. Same family, cousins. So why is it that millions of people could use a powerful narcotic and never get addicted? And even some people can use a hard drug and not get addicted. But some people use a hard drug once, and that's the end of it. Used cocaine one time, all of a sudden, that's it for life. Multiple factors for that, and we'll talk about that in 1 second, but I'll tell you this since you asked the question. A part of it could be genetic. A part of it could be epigenetics, like things that are genes that are sort of triggered by your environment. A part of it is your own, and like an example of that is like alcoholism, for example. You know, if me and another person have a couple of drinks and we binge, that person can have family genetic loading to become an alcoholic, so they're much more likely than I am. So one part is that. Another part could also be environmental. You used in a setting that, because I forgot the numbers on this actually, because I used to have a slide on it, but they break it down of like how many people use once and then go into addiction, use once and don't go into addiction. But the point that I make for you is that there's huge variation in terms of who does and who doesn't. So for us, we should still discourage obviously the first use, but we shouldn't be discouraged if there is a first use. Right? If someone says, oh, I used substance X one time, we're like, oh man, that's it for this kid. You're gonna be struggling with this the rest of your life. Not necessarily. If we can wrap the right kind of support around them at that time, you can potentially avert the cycle kind of use. No problem. Does that make sense? To answer the question? Other questions so far? You focus live? Okay, cool. So this is a little bit about the physical components of this, okay? And this is, I guess, what I was alluding to, like, why does this happen? So one part of it, like we said, potentially addiction. One part of it is your childhood experiences. There is a component of that, or the environment around you. A huge one as well, is other psychiatric comorbidities, or meaning you're struggling with something else, so you use a substance accordingly, right? I had a patient who would tell me, okay, anytime before I fly, I'm gonna drink as much as I possibly can because I'm so anxious before a flight. And then I started flying a lot for work, so I'm drinking every week as much as I possibly can to be able to fly. That turned into an alcohol use disorder. Or another person who is so depressed, so down, can't get through like the first year of college, and hey, a friend of ours is saying there's something you can use here, a little cocaine. Oh my God, I've never used, or Adderall. I've never used something like that before. Why would I use that? Well, grades and my mom, and I gotta be able to get 100 on every exam, otherwise they'll pick me out of being Coptic. Right? They remove your cross, take away your book of shame. Like, it's immediate reaction. So that person uses the drug because they are the term that's been used. There's other theories on this now, but one theory has been the idea that you're using a medicine for something. Marijuana is a huge one as well in this category. You have a high school kid, super anxious, and another genius high school kid around them says like, yo, the best thing for anxiety, man, now weed. Now it's accessible, you can put it in a little thingy, and everywhere you go, right? And then the experience is like, oh, this actually does help me. Man, all these old people, all these boomers, what are they talking about? Right? They don't know what they're talking about. They're wrong. That's just what they say, right? That's what they call us. So if somebody tells you that, a high school kid comes and says, I'm smoking weed because it helps my anxiety so much. And you know what it does? And it helps me sleep. Well, you don't know, it's medicinal. It's legal in mad places now. I can't tell you how many times people come to me and say, Dr. Miram, I get it, like, medication is cool, but can you prescribe me, like, a little bit of medicinal marijuana? Like, no. Makes for an awkward office interaction. But I do it in a more respectful way. But I explain the reasons, right? It's just, unfortunately, there's a big disconnect, and we're talking about it now for a second, but there's a big disconnect, especially with weed, about where, like, the public perspective is and where the medical literature. The medical literature is actually not even, like, controversial. Like, when it comes to studies in the American Psychiatric Association, things that are coming out, big-time studies, there's no, like, huge debate. Like, people know the huge negative side effects of something like marijuana. In the public, it's like, I don't know. Seems like a good idea. I read it on a blog. Respect that. So for you, in terms of recognition, why do I tell you these things? It's not that you're gonna like, oh, there's a genetic component, so I'm gonna find which chromosome it is. Nobody cares. The reason why it matters for you is because it gives, again, another layer of compassion. I'm approaching this person and saying, there's a part of it that could be just totally genetic, that they didn't have any contribution to. There's a part of it that could be environmental, that I can maybe help them. And there's a part of it that maybe they're just really anxious and they're using this to treat that. Maybe they're really depressed, so they're using this other substance. Maybe they're really whatever, so that's why they're using it. Does that make sense? Again, not assuming any one of these things, but asking and trying to figure out maybe there's something underlying. Questions so far? So far, some of this is like maybe new-ish, but not super new, right? This is all bad. Bad stuff. So drugs are bad. This is what I told, like, when I was speaking with the kids, when they asked me to give a similar talk to the kids that you guys serve. A portion of it was me telling them, like, hey guys, newsflash, oh my God, it's December 2019, drugs are like bad. Like, wow, so great, you brought a doctor to tell us drugs are bad, wow. That's not news to us, right? So I didn't want to spend too much of the talk telling you how bad drugs are. Cocaine can give you a heart attack. Heroin can do like that. Drugs are bad. But if you want me to elaborate on any particular drug, I'm happy to. What I wanted to focus on is how do we have the conversation, and two, how do we connect to resources? But this is the time where I wanted to pause. Anybody curious about how bad any drug is? Anybody think like, oh, maybe heroin's not so bad? Yes?
I see these days like a lot of even stores open something called CBD.
Yes.
What's that?
Yeah, good question. So in marijuana, there's different components. CBD, THC. There's a difference between what's being marketed and what's the reality. What's being marketed is this is the miracle drug. Put it in every food. Put it in like your cat food, in your cereal, in your water. It's actually incredible because it's a huge marketing opportunity. It's like amazing. People are like, oh, just cash in on this, right? So just recently, the FDA had to come in and say, like, stop putting this in every possible food group. Like, this is, stop. Something's wrong here. So that's what it is. What it is a component of marijuana, and it's supposed to be, when it's marketed again, is it's not the one that makes you high, it's the one that helps your anxiety and helps your stomach pain. That's why it's like a spice. Just put a little bit into everything. Get a little like a little salt. Sprinkle it everywhere. The reality is two huge problems with CBD. The first one, which is the most obvious, is that there is no regulation right now on this whatsoever. So if I buy water infused with CBD, I have no clue. They can tell you, oh, it's like this much CBD, and it's like, oh. The reality is there's no regulation, so it could have all this CBD, some of this THC, some other stuff, any other component of marijuana. And this is like public information. This is not something I'm inventing. Because there's no regulation, you have no idea what you're getting, number one. Number two, there is some preliminary research that's maybe positive, some preliminary research that's maybe negative. So where does that leave us long term? We have no idea. Where does that leave us in terms of possible negative effects? We have no idea. But the popularity of it is the great marketing opportunity. And patients ask me as well, and I tell them based on my reading of the current literature, I recommend against it. Because if you're going to take something that maybe has some possible good effect here or there, but also has maybe negative effect here and there, and we have no long-term idea of what it's really doing, I know things that have been going on for much more rigorous studies, like things that for something to get approved by the FDA, the level of study and the level of experimentation, the level of safety and efficacy is so high that we're like, let me just try this. And that's the problem with things that are just not regular.
So, if somebody, for example, has like terminal illness, and it says, I just like to take CBD because I don't care about long term because I'm dying anyway, is this acceptable?
Acceptable is an interesting question. If somebody has a terminal illness, and honestly, if they come and say, there's a thing called hospice care and palliative care for people with terminal disease. You know what they do there? They give them like amazing strong pain medication. Way stronger than CBD. Talking about high doses of morphine, this and that. Ethically, is that okay? Bless you. Thank you. For us as a church, we say medication is helpful when it's indicated. If we're treating we're using a pain medication to decrease pain at a time of terminal illness, we're diving more into the ethics of things. But I'll tell you from where the church stands, it wouldn't be something we say, no, you can't use morphine at the end of your life. Morphine's so powerful. Morphine is like hugely addictive. Like nobody wants to just use morphine every day. But if you're in palliative care, you're in terminal illness, it's totally cool. The problem that I have with the question, honestly, is that people ask that, say, oh, what about like glaucoma? When people have glaucoma, they smoke all weed. Bro, do you have glaucoma? You're 16. No, but like it helps them. Yeah, I get it. It helps them. Yes. What about again, like people with end-stage pancreatic cancer, and they smoke weed. Okay. Again, you're 14. You don't have end-stage pancreatic cancer. So it's sort of conflating the issue because you take something that's relevant to one particular subset of the population for a particular reason for a particular time, and we generalize it to everybody. We say, see? Yeah, well, that's why like drug studies don't happen that way. You don't take something that works for or is used for one particular setting and you use it for everybody all the time. Cool so far? Yes.
I've been seeing the news like on Fox or whatever when kids go to the hospital for vaping. I heard it's only when like the specific THC vaping. Is that true or is it like people go to hospital just a regular like nicotine vape?
There's been both. I know there was a recent study that showed there was a greater association for kids using THC vaping. But the issue with the vaping is not so much the substance that you're vaping, because THC has never had such a reaction on lungs to be able to cause near fatal injury instantly. That just never happened. People have been smoking weed for a long time. So even though there is that association more so, there have been definitely documented cases where people are just using, it's not the THC, it's just the nicotine that's bubblegum flavored, and you wind up in the hospital with, what's the new term for it? They created a term basically specifically because there's so much lung injury, vaping-associated lung injury. Yeah, vaping-induced lung injury. That's okay. Should I just keep touching it? So that's a good question, because that's the other kind of misconception that people will. Oh, did it again? Okay. It's gonna be your time. No, you're good. You're fine. But that's an important question because vaping is one of those things, right? Like that's everywhere, and the misinformation is everywhere. So if a kid is telling you, like, no, this is totally safe, you say, no, you totally don't know what you're talking about. With all love and respect and mercy and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Questions on vaping? I don't know if you already had other talks on it, so I didn't want to talk a whole lot about it. Any other questions on any specific substance? Marijuana, alcohol, vaping? Just so I get a sense. And I'm trying to do this in an anonymous way without you giving away. Yes?
I just have this question.
Yeah.
Like, I guess, not you in particular, but with like general psychiatric prescribing patterns. So like, marijuana can work for anxiety. I'm not saying it, like, there's evidence that it shows works and stuff like that, and we know that benzos are the go-to for anxiety. Unless like depression seems to be an overlying symptom.
Close, but okay.
And benzos are like pretty terrible drugs as well.
Yes.
So what do you guys tend to use as the best solution? Because those are both like
Yes.
crappy.
Great question. So let me just correct one piece of it, okay? So let's say somebody has terrible anxiety. And anxiety is a terrible disease. It's debilitating. It's one of the most common, like really awful things. So they're smoking weed for it. First, let's address the part, what is the effect of weed on anxiety? Do we know? Do we know in adolescence specifically? Yes. The answer is, it's terrible. In the moment, it's great. Because when you're high, everything's great. No one's gonna come and be like, yo, I smoked mad weed and now I'm really stressed out. No, smoke mad weed, you're really high right now. The high wears off, and they've studied this really carefully in adolescents specifically, and young adults. Anxiety, long term, let's say in a given month, not in the moment. Like if I ask you right now, you just smoked a whole bunch of weed. Are you anxious? Nah, I'm chilling. If I ask you over the course of a month, that's what they say. Patient called me yesterday. He's like, I'm kind of not as anxious as I was. Maybe I shouldn't take medicine. Like, you're a little high right now. Anyway, when you study it over the course of a month, or the course of a year, with weed versus without weed, significantly higher anxiety. This is the reality. This is a study. I can show you the link. I would be happy to. It was published in psychiatry. There's a really strong journal called the Green Journal from the American Psychiatric Association. They made this like their thing of the month 2 months ago. They showed you all the data because it's so clear. Does that part make sense? Because I want you first to know the data, like the evidence. The evidence is when it comes specifically to anxiety, specifically to depression, marijuana makes it worse. In the aggregate. In the moment is different. In the aggregate, terribly, much worse.
Is it
Yes.
is it like a desensitization over time, so like the anxiety increases, or is the anxiety staying the same but not taking more to like compensate?
Good question. It kind of works like this. I'm super anxious. So anxious is gonna go down, but then I get rebound anxiety afterwards. She's asking, is it like that I'm anxious and I need more and more weed as time goes on, and then that really helps me later? It's not exactly like that. It's more so that the anxiety is there all the time. I'm decreasing it for a moment, then it comes back worse. And I'm decreasing it a little bit, and then it comes back worse. So you continue to rebound the anxiety, and overall, now I need to use more and more weed, more and more often. I used to just smoke at night to go to sleep. I'm anxious at night, and I smoke at night, and I'm good. But now I'm anxious in the morning too, because I'm like this, living the day-to-day like this. Does that make sense? This is really, really important. Maybe we need to have we can have always a different discussion about weed specifically, because the misinformation is unbelievable actually about this subject. It's unbelievable, and it's totally off. That's the first part of your question, which is an important one. The second one is equally important. What's the go-to treatment for anxiety? It's not benzos. And if you go to a shrink, and the first thing they do is give you Xanax, that's a bad doctor. No offense to doctors everywhere. Regular anxiety, generalized anxiety as we call it, not regular, but generalized anxiety for everything. The mainstay treatment are things like Prozac, Zoloft, called SSRIs that work on serotonin in the brain, and it's not benzos. Because you're right, benzos are an addictive medicine that have side effects, It's a controlled substance that needs to be monitored very, very closely. It should only be used if you have anxiety and panic attacks. Panic attacks, if you've ever had one or seen someone have them, are awful, awful experiences. And you need something that works right there. For those reasons, you can use a small dose as needed of a benzo. But the mainstay treatment should never be that.
So why do we have a lot of doctors doing chronic 3 times a day?
Well,
twice a day?
that's a good question. So in case everybody hears it, and I'll be honest, I'll speak against or for or the reality of where doctors are. Sometimes there are bad prescribing practices. It's the same reason, doctors get all the blame for this now for the opioid epidemic, but it's part of the industry. How is it that someone has, like, oh man, I sprained my ankle, and you get Percocet for a month? How? It's insane. Why would that be the case? It's a complicated issue, but it used to be, okay, this is the push. Your pain is like another vital sign. Nobody should have pain ever. These medications are safe and amazing. Everybody should be on Percocet. Yay! And now we are on heroin. Similarly, someone who is on Klonopin 2 milligrams 4 times a day, that's bad. It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. It's why, again, part of your role as an advocate and a servant, with permission of the person you're the family you're working with, is to be able to check on them, like where things in the beginning phase, you have a huge role of connecting someone to treatment. Huge role, huge. In the second phase, you have a huge role in maintaining treatment. Oh, you still going to your doc? Okay, I don't care what you're talking about. You're still going, you're still engaged, you think still happening? Okay, you're going. All right, how do you feel with the treatment? Oh, I feel just like I sleep all day. Why? What do you take? Maybe I can connect you with someone in the church who's not going to see you, but maybe give you an idea. And I love to play that role, by the way. Even for us here in Jersey, if you have questions, and I get that call all the time. Someone is taking XYZ and this dose, hold on, maybe you should have a conversation with the doctor. Not change doctor, not kill the doctor, but just have a conversation. Okay? Definitely don't kill the doctor, but does that make sense? So we have some misconceptions about, you know what, I'd rather use weed because the things that doctors prescribe are even worse, are even more dangerous. Not so. Not the case. Other question? Someone? Yes.
So let's say you notice, one of the adolescents that are, they're just acting kind of off, and it's not like the normal way they've been doing. And then after that you notice it is continuous. So how do we approach them to say, well, is there any sort of substance abuse that's you've been doing, and then what are the steps following, if it is true or not?
Very good question. So that actually segues into where we're talking about now. What if there was a way that we can motivate people to change? And before we talk about motivating the change, which maybe is your second part of your question, how do we have the conversation? The general recommendation, and it ties into this too, is we have it in a normalized, non-judgmental kind of way. So you know what, my man, I feel like you've been a little stressed out. Everybody's stressed out. I get really stressed out too. So we normalize by putting it in the context of you're not the only one, and something that's not shameful. I feel like, I don't know, people are going through a lot. You feel like you're going through a lot? Yeah, I have this and that. Okay. So you have a relationship with the person, you align with them, and then here's the sentence, here's kind of the phrase of like, sometimes when people go through a lot and they're really stressed out, they try to figure out a way to feel better. Like with anything. Have you ever had something like that? And you'd be surprised, people just come out and tell you, like, oh my God, I've been through the worst. And when they feel like you're not going to be like, ha, anyway, cut you. You little junkie, I got you now. When they know that you're not going to do that, and you're going to say, okay, like, yeah, of course, oh man, yeah, when I was young, I really had, and I share that story for me, not with patients sometimes, but with kids I serve. I was like, I thought about it. I thought about taking drugs because it sounded like a good idea at the time. But, I found out, like, for me and people around me, it wasn't great, but, like, what's it doing for you? What's going on in your life? Da-da-da-da. That's the relationship part. So in terms of getting someone to open up to you, disclose to you, you have to set it up that this is not, like, somewhere you're going to go to prison for tomorrow. We're, like, I'm your brother, I'm your sister, so I'm here for you. And when people go through stuff, sometimes they turn to these kind of things. Does that make sense in terms of how you kind of weave into the conversation? Then, let's say they say, yes, you know what, thanks for asking. I actually hate it. Like, I've been smoking so much weed, like, that it's, like, awful. I don't know what to do with it anymore. what if there was a way that we can motivate people to change? Has anybody here heard of motivational interviewing? Some people. Very good. Anybody else? 2 people? Okay, great. We don't have a ton of time. How much time do we have? I don't know. Anybody know? 10 minutes? Okay. I'm going to try not to take up too much more of your time. But basically, this is really cool. And if you're not in the field necessarily, you may not have even heard the term. But usually, like we said, we're not going to talk about this subject with people. We're just judgment and saying this is bad, don't do it. But there's a whole method of speaking with someone who's struggling to change and doesn't know how to. It's called motivational interviewing, okay? And it's a construct that's been really effective, really evidence-based. It's designed to help use the person's motivation. I'll give you examples first. Here's the style. The way I think of the style is like basically if you were to put like a manual, like a Christian conversation. What's a Christian conversation? You begin with, it's not judgmental and collaborative. And sometimes this sounds like, oh, of course, I'm Christian. I'm not judgmental at all. Okay? Right? We're Egyptian, most of us, I think. We have an innate bias to, if you're using drugs, you are psyched. You are bad, okay? You have, like, let's just check your bias at the door so that you know it, and you know it from our family, you know it from our culture. So we begin with that of saying, no, my approach to someone who's using this is not judgmental, is not confrontational. I'm not going to get into it with them. I'm going to collaborate. Collaborate means I'm going to come alongside. It means I'm going to be on your team. It means I'm in there with you. It's persuasive, but not confrontational. Talk about what that means in a second. Here's the big thing. Sometimes someone tells you, okay, I smoke weed. The next thing that triggers into our minds, okay, I'm going to convince them that weed is stupid. So let me give you, like, what I'm telling you now in terms of evidence and study and stuff like that, should not be the first thing you do with a kid. Did you know? You probably don't know because you're 15. What do you know? You know about Snapchat, right? Did you know that weed is this, 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 this? And I give you a list of facts, and I'll argue with you. You guys know this probably better than I do. Anybody here make a kid change their behavior by arguing with them? Just give me a hand raise. If you did, let me know. That's amazing. Anyone? No one, right? You're not going to out-argue a 14-year-old and be like, ha, I win. Now, you're going to go clean your room. If you're a parent. Or now you're going to stop going to these parties. Doesn't work. So our approach will not be argumentative. So that's why the key feature, this is both what I learned in those 2 years as well as when we're talking with people here, it's not more so about what you say, it's more about what you will listen to. You will not speak as much as you listen. Does that make sense? It's hard for us. It's hard for me. I'll confess to you again, really hard, because I love the sound of my own voice. Well, give me a microphone, blah, 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 blah. Because I just don't care what you have to say. Just listen to me. So in any given setting, if you're sitting talking with a kid for 10 minutes, you should be listening for 8. Talking for 2. Does that make sense? If that's not the case, think about the last time you talked with a kid, a lost kid for a while, for like an hour. Oh, we're chilling, having some Starbucks. You bought him an organic soy, Xiaomi, extra frappuccino. Do you listen most of the time? Or do you listen a little bit and say, like, yeah. But let me tell you from the Bible and like Beya and like the Psalmody. I'm not saying you do that, but I'm saying that's a different approach. Does that make sense? And we're communicating, this is a hard thing too, for teenagers. Communicating respect for them as an individual. Like, wow, you're 13 and I respect you. Like, you don't have to use a term, but to like elevate their thinking. You are respectable. You are a young adult. You make decisions, and I'm going to help you with these decisions. You're in charge here. That's a big paradigm shift for high school kids, trust me. Because they're used to, at school, you're not in charge, you're being told what to do. At home, you definitely ain't in charge, you're getting told what to do. At church, so if you sit with them as a servant and says like, no, you make decisions, I'm going to help you make decisions, but you are the one in charge. Because again, here's the reality. The alternative would be if you think they're not in charge and if you think you can force them to do anything, newsflash, baby, you're wrong. Right? So we either embrace the fact that we have no power over them, or we pretend that we do and still talk to them like the big bad servant. Cool so far? Okay. The spirit of it again here's the key, is the change is coming from them, not you. And if you think about it, I always think about this when the Lord spoke to people. Why is it that Jesus knows all of the things, right? He knows all of the things that ever were and ever were to be. Why would Jesus ask questions? Why? Why? That's sort of a rhetorical question, but you can answer it. Yeah.
To get them to like answer
Yeah. Very good. Because if Jesus just came and said, you should repent, and so should you, that wouldn't get anywhere. But if he came and engaged in a conversation, like, oh yeah, all right, tell me about this. Oh, cool, yeah, what's up with that? Boom, boom, boom. In that exchange, and they termed it later sort of like a Socratic way, right? Asking almost 100 questions. He showed people that change comes from you and not from him. Even God, think about this is cool. Even God, who's God, respects you enough not to make you repent. Isn't that cool? If God can do that, if God can look at you and say like, you should repent, but really it's on you, no problem, no pressure. That's so, as a dude, I look at God and I say that's so respectful, that God respects my will so much. We ought to respect the will of a 14-year-old. Because God, who is way bigger of a distance than me and God than me and a 14-year-old. Yeah? So the respect piece and the change comes from them. Their choice, we talked about that. And their own concern, we talked about that too. Here's the other piece that's really important. Anybody hear this term ambivalence? Some people, right? Good. So ambivalence is this like on the fence kind of life, which oftentimes you'll see in people who are struggling with this kind of stuff. And that's what you're shooting for. That's what you're aiming for. That's what you want to get to. You want to get to like, I don't know, maybe. Are drugs look amazing? Well, they're not amazing. Like, is marijuana the greatest thing in your life? Well, no. Okay, but it's hard for you to stop it. Well, yeah, it is kind of hard. That middle ground, because sometimes for us, again, spiritually, we are averse to this middle ground, right? We know the Revelation verse. We know that you're either hot or cold or I vomit you out of my mouth. But you don't approach people who are struggling with change in that way. You don't say like, are you Christian or you're not Christian? Are you sober or you're not sober? In this concept, we're talking again, right, about recovery. In recovery, think about it like repentance. We're not telling people, did you repent or are you unrepentant? You're in the spectrum. You're in the line. We're getting it to the point like, oh, maybe I want to repent, but it's hard. That's how you want to think about it in like spiritual words. In the recovery words, it's like, you want to change, but you can't. You want to change, but you're having a hard time. Does that make sense? So instead of being angry at that middle place, because it is sometimes frustrating, come on, man, just go to rehab. I'll give you an example. Before I got into any of these training stuff, we used to do a thing every week with people who are homeless in Jersey City. And our big focus was every week, okay, man, ready for detox? And the guy would be like, no. Like, oh, not ready for detox. All right, here's a sandwich. All right, ready for detox? No. All right, here's pizza. And I never really understood it, as if like the answer to treatment is detox or bust. Do you think about that sometimes too? Do you think in that way? If you do, let me reel you back one way. And I'll try to talk about specific settings. It's not just detox or bust. It's not just repentance or bust. It's not just are you 0 or 100. Embracing the middle. Make sense so far? Okay. I'm going to skip this, talking about change talk. Here's one kind of way to explore it for you, okay? And this is like a crash course in motivational interviewing. It's like the whole thing, but we're just doing a crash course. If you look at these 4 things and you try to avoid yes or no answers, okay, what are the things that are good about it? Do you smoke a weed? What's good about weed? I promise you, you might be the first person ever to ask them that who's not like your dumb friend. I'm sure you're smoking weed for a reason. Tell me some of the things that are good about weed for you. And they got some things to say. You're gonna hear them. Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. All right. And then maybe, what are some of the not so good things about weed for you? Maybe there's something that's not making you feel so good. Oh, you know what? Sometimes if I can't get it, I feel this way. Sometimes if this happens, I feel that way. But if you start with this one, then you can talk about that one. Does that make sense? Yes?
What are some of the good things that you hear
About weed? So like I said, so if I ask somebody, hey, what are some good things about weed? Like what's helping me? And you know what? Like I feel like I get really, really anxious, and when I smoke, I feel a little calm. I feel like I can't sleep, but when I smoke, like I can sleep. But what are some of the not so good things for you about weed? Because I don't know, like, and I had this specifically for a patient recently who was smoking 3 times a day, and then we started treatment for anxiety, and now she doesn't smoke at all. Or maybe like once a week with friends, like in a social setting. It's coming down. She would say like, wow, like I didn't realize how much of my day revolved around weed. How much of my day revolved around it, how much of my wallet revolved around it, and how much it can be like sort of isolating. Like I'm not smoking to have fun. I'm smoking just to be normal. And I didn't really like that. Those are some of the things that people are saying to me. And now it feels like there's just something that works better than when I was doing before. But people's answers are different. People might say, whatever, you know what I mean? But you don't know unless you ask. And again, the answer and the question is surprising to people because the expectation of you as a church person is that you will be judgy and annoying. And from the sounds of it, you are neither. So that's why it's good to talk about. Same thing with change. Like, what are some good things maybe? Or what are some hard things or not so hard things? What are some good things or not so good things? Does that make sense? Like you're just approaching both sides with them, starting with the side that they are surprised by. I'm gonna give you some examples of like micro skills. You know how when I was in Sunday school, I didn't hear a lot of open-ended questions. I heard a lot of like rhetorical, you should answer the way I'm expecting you to question. Jesus is good, isn't he? Huh? And I'm happy as well, sah? Sah. I don't really like you, but I like it. An open-ended question, you make it your aim that it's not going to be a yes or no. Tell me about what's it like to da-da-da-da-da. Again, if you're someone who's a servant and you work with the mercy and love of God, you really want to know about the person, you love them, and you know, this is maybe the undertone of this whole presentation, you know that the answer to all of this is connecting them to the person of Christ. Right? And Christ has given us, thank God, all these different tools. He's given us therapy, he's given us meds, he's given us the way to serve. But to connect him or her to Christ, you want to do it in a way that's on their terms, not on yours. Cool? So that's open-ended questions. Affirming. Sometimes, again, if you're a high school kid, you may be surprised how little affirmation they get outside of their friends. There's a Christian rapper that I listened to who was saying when he was young, he was like, they say I'm good at bad things, but at least they're proud of me. People around me would say like, oh wow, you're really good at like knocking people out. You're really strong. Wow, you're really good at like hustling the weed when we don't have it. You're really good at that stuff. Where do you find that weed? Maybe you can affirm them. And again, sometimes people with kids that we're treating or serving are coming from an environment where maybe there's no affirmation anywhere around. It could be a difficult family situation, difficult friends, and you can find a way to turn a negative thing into a positive. For example, the kid I saw was not only smoking weed, he was selling weed. Okay? This little kid is selling weed, and we're like, wow, that's really hard for you to kind of work this little entrepreneurial situation. You got a little side business that's you're very smart. You're like, oh, I am very smart. So you compliment them on something that's bad. Another little kid was finding a way, this kid was a wizard, to like hack into all his family's everything, funnel money, and like launder it through different gift cards. Like, yo, you're 11, bro. Like, if I get locked out of Instagram, that's it for me. There's no more gram for the rest of the year. I was like, it's amazing. It's amazing. Affirming. Like, oh, wow, there's a good part here. And the point is not to make this good behavior, but you're a good person. You're good. You have a good skill. Something about you affirms you as a person, and that can help you motivate you for change. Reflective listening. I'm going to skip some of these for the sake of time, okay? Basically, sometimes you think you heard somebody, but you don't know what they really said unless you try to summarize. You're like, oh, okay, so what you're saying is blah, 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 blah. You're like, what? Are you speak English? I didn't say that. Right? Summarizing could be also similar of like, all right, so it sounds like from all the things that you're saying is that drugs are bad. Okay, cool. Some examples of affirming, like I said here, like you're the kind of person who does this. So like, I only do drugs with my friends. Like, wow, okay, so it sounds like you're someone who really values your friendships. Can you use that? Someone who values your friendships, and you can use that past for change later? Yes. So look for that. Look for those things that like, wow, in the middle of all the darkness. And that's again what Jesus did. Even with the Samaritan woman, like, remember, right? He said to her, yes, in that you spoke truly. You're right. You're so honest. None of these guys are your husband. You're right. But he commended her that way, didn't he? Isn't that a compliment? In that you spoke truly? These are kind of more complicated. This is like advanced, like not 101, 110. So we don't have time for it today. Is that okay if I skip this? You will have the slides. If you have questions on them, because they're like harder, you can just let me know and we can go through them. But beyond like simple reflection, amplified reflection, so I'm going to just run through these because they're... But I will tell you this. I want to tell you, avoid confrontation, okay? Like, and maybe you belabor this, but at some point it can come up again. Do you know what you're doing? Do you know how bad this is on your family? Like, powerful change agents like that. Finger wagging. Yes?
Wait, I have a question. So,
Yeah.
how do you even confront it? Like, how do you even have a conversation if you're trying to avoid confrontation? Like I know one of the kids is vaping, for example, but they didn't tell me.
Right.
But, like, I know about it, and I want to talk to them about it. How am I supposed to talk to them about it without confronting?
Not confronting. Very good question. Very good question. Because oftentimes, if you're talking with a kid, the assumption would be like, oh man, like who snitched? Right? Somebody got me. It's similar to your question in the sense of this. The first thing, we do nothing in service, right? I'm sure you guys talk about it all the time. If there's no solid relationship where that person feels like, above all else, I love you, I care for you, there's nothing that you can do to make me stop loving you, stop caring for you. If you have to say that in a separate context, if you have to like show that in one way or another, if you gotta show up for them in another way, like that's the bedrock. If you don't have that, here's like the classic mistake that we have, right? We sometimes try to approach behavior change before I care about your character. Don't tell me to change. Who are you? I don't know if you love me. I don't know if you care about me. You're just trying to change me. Get out of here. But like, yo, like people that have made an impact on my life, for example. People have served us. Think about people that served you as a Christian. Or people that like showed you like, yo, like I love you, bro. You're my man. And because of that, you're being an idiot, for example. Or because of that, like, hey, like what's up with that? Or because of that, whatever. So that's our flagship. That's the beginning. That's the bedrock. Let's say you have that. You have a relationship with this kid. This little girl, and you get a sense of, you know what, I know she's been vaping from other people. Here's the approach again, right? Not coming at you like, I found out, I'm gonna tell your mom. But sometimes, when things are like all around us at school, it's hard to avoid it. Sometimes when we're like really stressed out, maybe we'll do something that's not usual for us. Any phrase that you want to use to say to them, here's what you want to communicate. You're not the only one, and you are not a horrible person. That's don't say those things, you might say it specifically, but that's what you want to communicate, yes?
But doesn't that justify what they're doing?
Good question, good question. If we do that, they're going to be like, yeah, my servant said there's other people that do it. Ha, now I finally do it every day. Yes, now I got it. Here's a news flash for you, let me break it down. Don't be offended. Don't be offended. Nobody's waiting for your permission to do that behavior. I'm sorry. Is that okay to say? I'm sorry. Nobody is like, wow, finally my servant said I can smoke weed. And then my servant like made it seem like weed is good. Okay, I'm gonna smoke mad weed now. They're not waiting for your permission. Let me just finish one point. Because they're not waiting for your permission, they are waiting for your love and for you not to judge them. There's a difference for us as Christians. Not judging someone is not the same thing as saying what you're doing is an endorsement. You know how people sometimes on Twitter, it's like, retweets are not endorsements. Me saying that I love you, does that mean you should be sinning? The same thing if a kid tells you, I don't know, I lie or I cheat. or I do whatever. And I say, like me aligning with them and understanding like sometimes when we are whatever, we can do things that we regret. Is not saying that we regret things or those things are awesome. So we get stuck at that point. Because we get stuck at that point, we don't get to the point of not being judgmental, and we actually give the kids what they're waiting for. Whenever they speak with us, the kids are waiting for, you're going to judge me, aren't you? You're a servant. You're going to tell me what I'm doing is wrong. Believe me, oftentimes, kids know this is wrong. They're not waiting for you to tell them, Habibi, ghalat. If that was the case, we'd be fine. We wouldn't have to have a retreat about this. Everybody would just go around, ghalat, ghalat, ghalat. Wrong, stupid, ugly, so stop. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And it doesn't, so this is what I want that to be very clear, it doesn't make the kid feel like, yeah, now I'm validated and I can do all the stuff. No, but it does make me feel like now I can come to you. I know you're not going to kick me when I'm down. Now I can come to you and you're not just going to overreact or like come at me sideways. Yes?
I think it's similar to, like we always talk about how like, as a servant, we can't like, say we have struggled with something like this, right? We can't ever say that to a kid because they're going to have the example in their head like, oh, I can struggle with this and get over it. So I feel like that's more of what she was saying, right? And that like, if we're like, we as servants are like talking about how there's no shame in it, something like that. Not that we shouldn't be. I agree that we should be saying that, but kids could get the wrong idea, like almost take hope in what we're saying.
Your hope will be very
feel
dangerous.
comfortable where they are, as opposed to feeling an urgency to get out of the situation.
I get what you're saying. Here's the thing. We're not saying there's no shame in this. Like it's even interesting how you phrase the question if you think about it, right? Because if they do that, they can take hope in what we're saying. That would be okay.
I mean, like, 'cause it's like everything's gonna be okay. Like, they know, like I don't know. That's how they see it. I feel like that's how they see it.
That's how they see it. You're right. If we're worried about kids getting lulled into like, when I'm older, I'll be spiritual. Like, I'll stop doing cocaine when I get older. And we want to drive the sense of urgency. That's why I get what you're saying. Sense of distinction that we're saying, right? Like if someone right now is like in the middle of a life-threatening way they're using drugs, we may have to call EMS. Like there's a place for that too, right? They're overdosing on like prescription drugs at home. There's a time for us to call an ambulance. But what I'm saying is, even in your example, like I told you guys, the fact that I thought about this idea as a high school kid. I didn't tell you like every single one of my sins as a high school kid, because it's not relevant. And this goes to the idea of like how much do you want to share with someone. If you tell a kid, you know what, when I was in high school, like I was stressed out and there were temptations around me, and sometimes I thought about them too. But here's what helped me. We worry that that's going to reinforce for them like, he's a servant. Again, the misunderstanding that we have is the kids think we're perfect. Newsflash. These kids know, even if they don't know you as an individual, they know you ain't no angel. You can come down from heaven. Okay, none of us. So they know that, if anything, if you take that delusion outside of our own minds, saying, listen, I'm not like 175. I was in high school and there were temptations. There was whatever, drugs, life, like all these things. But you know what really helped me? Is blank, blank, blank. What doesn't help you is the details. Like, yo, this one time I went to a party and it was crazy. Like, it doesn't help anything. It doesn't help anything. Okay? Your individual sins are not helpful, but your idea and understanding of a struggle with God is very helpful. It's very helpful, and I hope I can relate this to you. What you're afraid of, the opposite happens. You're afraid if you open up to a kid a little bit, he's gonna be like, I knew it. Even the servants are like cracked out. I'm gonna just go do my thing. What happens is the opposite. Is like, wow, the servants are human, so I can talk to them on a human level. The servants are not like magical, like, oh wow, oil everywhere. Look at the oil, like it does. You see what I'm saying? So we're not, when I say normalizing, maybe that term trips people up. I'm not saying this is normal. I'm not saying we're going to say to them, hey, drugs are amazing. Drugs are normal. No. What we are saying is that there's a difference between the fact of saying this behavior is normal versus it is common. It happens. Because it happens, you might be in that same boat too. Are you? Reaching out my hand. And they say, yeah, I am. All right, let's talk about it. Does that make sense? Yes.
I know in your first slide you talked about some of the kids use by distinction and some you say from the fire. I don't want to go as far as to say you need like clinical background to get to that point of knowing how to differentiate. But as servants, I feel like we need to. The next step is like having some practical like experience or training, because a lot of I know like as servants we're young and we don't have as much wisdom, and we'll do whatever we think off the cuff is right. So I feel like the next step has to be at least some practical like training, or like get a certificate or go to a class, or no, for real, like go to a class on like a weekend instead of making like our off the cuff like decisions, like scold this kid or like.
You're definitely right. You're definitely right, honestly. And part of it, I mean, we can arrange. There's something called mental health first aid, which can talk both about substance use and mental health, and it's free. And they come and do an all-day training. I was actually just speaking with one of the representatives from Jersey on Friday. So that's a great idea. That would really be helpful. Part of it actually is what you're doing now. Part of the training, like motivational interviewing, is actual training that's used in substance use treatment. Like if you're going into like an amazing facility in Colombia, they're going to use motivational interviewing. So part of it is the conversation. Yes.
So I actually had an experience that is perfectly what you're saying during the festival. So it was something at the festival, and I saw one of the kids who was definitely struggling, definitely very washy. So he had huge earrings in his ears. He was kind of hiding because I was coming, so he kind of was anticipating the conversation. And it was a long sleep, it was a long weekend, I was kind of tired, and I didn't even have the energy, I wasn't even making a distinction. I just didn't even have the energy to confront him or get into the conversation. I looked at him and I said, "What's up?" Didn't even acknowledge. And he acknowledged it for me. He said, "Oh, you're not listening to the earrings?" I was like,
Like you like him or what? Like,
I answered him, I was like, "It is what it is. We've already gotten it. It's done. It's too late." So my mentality at that point was to try to change it to like, it's done. I'm not going to focus on this. It's done. He told the servant later on that he is so happy that I'm not judging him, that I'm not like, he just feels welcome. I didn't even pretend to make a distinction or anything. I just didn't do it. So I definitely understand that there's some certain kids, and I'm sure we can be scared to like miss an opportunity to outreach them and speak to them. But that distinction verse is extremely critical. So if we know our kids, we know our sheep, like John 10 it says, then we know who to give a word to, who to sit down with, and some to just set the Samaritan woman. So it's something positive, and okay, move on. So I think what you're saying is perfect.
thank you. Yes.
I'm not gonna try to tell you, but I had that exact same scenario with a kid from my class. He used to wear this hood every single class, right? And then eventually when we took it off, right? And then I didn't say anything, and he said that the reason why he was wearing it is because he had earrings, right? And then I was like, I would have rather you just like take off your hood. You know what I'm saying? Like that was just the reason I would put it in class and play like that every day. And then he thought I was okay with it because he was at home. It's like
So here's the thing. I know
like
you're
kids
not
take both extremes. That's what I'm saying. Kids will take you not condemning something as you condoning it.
Yes, but your first two things: the general idea of wisdom and distinction, and two, your default. If your default practice is condemning people in case they are confused, like everybody knows where you stand on that kind of stuff. People, again, like I don't know why we think, unless, and this is both for inside the church and outside the church, unless we walk around saying abortion's bad, this is bad, then people are confused, like, oh, what do Christians believe? No, people know that we are against mad stuff. People in the church know, especially a high school kid, he knows that the earring thing is, the servant is like, it's like a little, like a red cape for a boy. Huh? You see my earrings? What do you think? It's bad, right? You know something's bad? The default, if our default is judgment, we lose people. I'm not saying that we say everything is amazing. What I am saying is, if our default is come into the fold, be among the sheep here, and we're going to work on this together, then you can gain people. Especially with people who are outside. Yes. 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 Good question. People who are vaping for a while, can you stop suddenly or can you stop gradually? I want to tell you this. And it'll answer vaping as well as marijuana, as well as other things. Every substance use disorder that's there, here are the options, right? You can go something intensive that you're like living there, residential treatment. You can go to something that's a little bit longer, but not like living, like 28 days, like a rehab. You can go for a few days like detox, or you can be treated in an outpatient setting as you go by your doctor. What does treatment look like? If you want to stop vaping, let's say, there is a medication part that's very effective. So I treat young adults and adolescents who vape. Hey, so there's this medicine that's FDA approved that can help you stop vaping. I'm gonna start you on this medicine. And you can also be combined with replacing that nicotine that's very addictive, more addictive than many other things, along with therapy, along with counseling at church. If they stop tomorrow, that's okay, it's okay. The big thing for us is not the timeline of stopping, but to engage people in treatment, to get treatment on board. So you want to be able to tell them that if you want to try to stop whatever you're using, marijuana, vaping, heroin, it's not that the only option, alcohol, that the only option is go to detox and stop right now. It's not sobriety or zero use or 100% use. It's not you're vaping all day, every day, and then it has to be, if you're going to stop, you got to stop cold turkey. That is not an effective way to do it. What's an effective way to do it, oftentimes, it can happen. You can't stop tomorrow, do a cold turkey, and nobody can help you, and you're just on your own. But what's effective for us as servants to want to push people to and give them an option, give them a reality, is like, you don't have to go like away. If you're a kid vaping, you can go to your pediatrician, or you can go to a list here, either in SAMHSA or in Psychology Today. For weed, for example, there's a medicine that can help you both, if you have anxiety, treat your anxiety, but also there's a specific evidence that this helps you stop smoking weed. For alcohol, people don't know this. This was news to me when I had dinner with some friends actually from this church. And they're like, oh, I know somebody who's like, an alcoholic. So they got to go to like AA. But there's a medicine that you can take once a month that can significantly decrease cravings and help you stop using alcohol. It's important for us to know that, because when we know that, we can give people the option of like, it's not just stop tomorrow or bust. It's not just detox or bust, but there's a way to gradually treat you. And as you're being treated, I'm walking with you in that process. I'm with you. I'm your servant. I'm your sister. Yes.
It's something that I feel can be a problem. Well, like I know it's a problem, like parents, like
Yeah.
because yes, I can go up to adults and tell them like, okay, let's go and do this together. But like I feel like parents, even like in this generation, they still don't like believe like this stuff is addictive. They don't believe like the prices. They think like these are just rebelling, and it's so like it's like hard. You can't like obviously we can't take the kid against their parents' consent. So then
It's definitely, parents can definitely be a challenge. Here are some things that sometimes we'll have the bigger guns for parents. Sometimes that's a Buna. Sometimes it's a more senior servant who speaks more of their language, honestly, I'm just being honest. Like if I talk to a parent, I'm talking in Arabic. For whatever that's worth. Because it's a barrier, and if the parents are not coming to you and saying, save my kid, which is a big percentage already of people, if they're coming to you and like, hey, Tant, like, your kid is smoking a lot of weed, the approach for that, similarly to where you're approaching the actual kid, also, again, in the context of some of these kids here, America, so, a temptation, doesn't mean that your kid is bad, doesn't mean that your parenting is bad, it's not your fault. Like, the immediate impact or the immediate reaction that a parent will have is you as a servant are coming to tell me I'm a bad parent. So you know that going in, so you come in with saying, I know you guys are wonderful parents, I know you're trying to do your best, and a lot of our kids are struggling with a lot of stuff, and little Mina, I think, is maybe struggling with something, and we want to try to help her. Or little Marina is having a hard time with something. So the conversation begins with the parents of enforcing for them that you're not bad parents. Then if they're not responding to that still, you can have more backup, older servant, Abuna, to say, listen, again, no judgment, nothing bad, but we want to help your kid. We want to help your kid. If that continues to be a problem, the difference with substance use, as opposed to other things, is there's more drastic measures. And this is, again, what I would say, similar to my man's question here of you may need to ask more guidance from like a doctor or more senior servant, because there's a point where this can be like neglect, or it can be like a legal responsibility. If your kid is doing cocaine and you do nothing about it, like we may have to call DIFUS. See what I'm saying? You don't want to bring that up. Hey, good morning, we're calling DIFUS. But it's a component to be aware of. So in the spectrum of like severity, there are some things like we were talking about. We got to call an ambulance. There are some things we have to get the legal enforcement involved because it can be very serious. But at least we want to be able to maintain a connection. Yes.
So that sometimes or at least I've been involved in certain situations where a kid runs to his car, a kid running in the bathroom, and he's high on the spot. And I know he's high. So what would your recommendation be on how to, and I have that relationship with him and love. So what would your recommendation be to approach a kid on the spot who I know is high?
So if a kid is high in the moment, and this is a kid who's like lost, or a kid that's like a church kid? Or somewhere in between?
I would say no somewhere.
Somewhere in between. Okay. Here's the thing, and this is like a church?
Yeah.
Okay. So my general recommendation, there isn't like empirical data on this like for everybody. But what I would do, what I would suggest in that situation is for you to come and say to the kid, again, you have the relationship and he knows that you love him, he knows that you care about him, in a loving way to set a limit, to say like, this is not the right behavior in the setting. That's actually okay if this is someone who's not just gonna leave in terms of like being outside the church, right? If it's someone who's more in a lost category and like you caught them doing something, it would be a similar approach to the earrings thing. Is you want to let them be aware of the fact that you're there for them and you know them, and also you understand the behavior, but you're not going to comment on it right that second. That'll last for a little bit longer over time, because it's going to be more important in that moment to comment on the person and the relationship than it is on the behavior. To maintain that link, exactly like the example that you gave. But if it's a kid who's like sort of in between, and you can use a distinction of saying, like, listen, I love you, you know that I care about you, you've known me for a long time, but there are some things that are not really good to do in this setting, like you can set a limit. Because we're not saying here is that you don't set limits or you don't have different conversations ever with anybody. There's a role for that, especially when there's kind of substance use going on right now. But what you want to remember is when somebody's high, you remember everything you're doing anyway. See what I'm saying? Like how much they retain from that is more so about the experience than it is of what you like said to them. So the tone that you want to set is like loving but firm. That's what I would want someone to kind of walk away with, is like open arms, but also like I love you enough to set a limit, but that you know that you'll be able to come back. Yes?
So I know that there's been like studies about like really like the efficacy of like drug like educational programs for like adolescents, like the studies say like it's not really helpful or it actually matters worse and increasing curiosity among the kids. Do you think as like servants, like should these be topics that we should like, even if it's just like say once a month or talk, should be implementing as to try to educate them about like the harmful effects of drugs? Or do you think that could do more potential harm if like say not majority of the kids are going through it?
That's a very good question. So one of the reasons why those programs were not super effective is because, again, the main focus was like, just say no, abstinence, like just never do anything, and at the same time, giving you way too much information about the drug itself than you would ever really need to know. So in terms of for us, what should we do in terms of education that would be effective and not make the kids like explore? It could be enough, without getting into too much detail about an individual drug, to say, listen, in the spiritual life, maybe once a month or however long, people can struggle with all kinds of stuff. And there are people around us who are struggling with these things, with substance use. When we do, the answer still is the person of Christ. So to be able to answer your question kind of directly, to broach the topic, to know that it's on your radar, for them to know that like substance use is something that they can talk about in church, they can ask about in church, they can ask your servant about, like I know it, I understand it, I've thought about it, it's familiar to me. You're not asking me about like, I don't know, stocks. It's relevant here, it belongs here, is what you want to say. It belongs here, but we're not going to get into nitty-gritty details. We can tell kids that like, you can talk about struggling with porn, but we don't have to like discuss the ins and outs of porn. You get what I'm saying? So that's kind of the takeaway, is to know that it belongs here, and then to be able to say the takeaway point is we can treat it here, not treat it here, but we can connect to the treatment here, and it doesn't involve just sending you away somewhere. And there's a part of how we understand it. What treatment looks like. Treatment for us as Orthodox Christians is the person of Christ. It's bio, psycho, social, spiritual. It's Christ-centered. There's a medical component, there's a psychological component, and a social component. There's a role in the community, there's a role of your mind, there's a role of medicine, and there's a role of the church. Make sense? I know we're already kind of over the time, so the last thing I wanted to just tell you is some of these resources. So SAMHSA is like the national organization that can give you can put in a zip code there and say that I want an addiction place. I want somewhere for detox, I want somewhere for rehab, I want somewhere with just counseling, and they can give you something specifically for like that town. Same for psychology today. Same also for the individual insurance company. If someone doesn't have insurance, you can also find free treatment. And the reason I say your role is vital, there was recently this thing, you know Hassan Minhaj, the Indian guy, comedian?
Yeah.
So he had this thing about mental health where he highlighted something from a prominent article in Psychiatric Services, which was a good journal, about how sometimes people struggle to take this first step. Because even when they get a list of places that's not accurate or something, it highlights again your role. So going back to the idea, last thing I'll say, is that we're this team. Your role in the team is as important as the doctor, as important as the priest, as important as the therapist, as important as the drug counselor. Why? Because sometimes you are the person who's going to make the first phone call to help them connect to a place. And then sometimes you are going to be the person that says, hey, like, it's really great that you went to so-and-so, but it feels like you've been out of there for some time. What's up with that? Does that make sense? So don't underplay your role, but also don't let your role take over everybody else's. That's our other kind of Coptic default. It's like, okay, so now I'm going to be like really a self-sacrificial servant. So I'm going to like pick you up and take you and like try to do everything, and then I burn out and I'm too tired and I can't do it, and it fails, and you don't do well and I don't do well, and we all struggle. So remembering the team. Cool. Any other questions? I know this was longer than I thought, I'm sorry. Yes?
I have a question. Do you think that the statistics inside the church are the same as statistics outside the church?
It's a good question. Oh yeah, that's always a question? No. So I'll tell you where the literature is, like based on what we know. We know that the statistics inside the church are not zero. Just in case we're wondering. Okay. But we also know is that there's actually a really good place if you're looking for this kind of research out of Duke. If you just Google Duke spirituality health, there's a great kind of journal that comes out that way. And what they show is across the board actually in mental health and substance use. And recently there was a book come out of Harvard that was released. A lot of this to name drop to say that there's really good research, really good data. That says if you're connected to a church community, if you're part of spiritual practices, there's a dose-dependent decrease in your symptoms, both in mental health as well as in substance use, which is kind of consistent with our experience. Like if someone is really, really connected and is there all the time, it's a little bit less, definitely less than it would be externally. It's still there. And the other piece I'll tell you is the more anecdotal data from St. Luke's, the Coptic facility, is that because people who are getting treated outside have kind of the physical component being treated, the therapy component, but there's no spiritual, they struggle. When you're coming to St. Luke's, you're Coptic, you're in a community, you have all these things, and we put in the biological part. You tend to, what we've seen is people actually do a little bit better, recover a little bit quicker, respond a little bit better than someone who doesn't have the community resources in place. Does that make sense? So the impetus, I would say, is that because in our community, we do a great job of like social support, community support, like we're like a family. That's one of the great things about us. But we don't have great connection to like the physical treatment part. When we get that connection, people will do better than people who don't have the underlying connection that we have, if that makes sense. Okay, we got a couple questions. So, should one or more servants within the class be talking to the same kid? Oh. That's my honest answer. I mean, depending on the situation, I guess. Like if you have, sometimes, again, making a distinction, there are some kids who need like a team of servants, right? And understanding that like, hey, like I'm gonna talk to them about such and such, we talk to them about such and such, but we also wanna be like aware of what our role as a team and be able to kind of talk together as a team as well. So that's kind of my big sentiment about that question. I don't know if it helps. If you have more, you can tell me. Sometimes we worry about sending kids or loved ones to the non-Christian counselor. That's a good question. Because they only give certain principles against our beliefs. That's a very good question, actually. If, let's say, you want someone to go to detox or rehab, does it have to be a Christian facility? If it's not going to be Coptic, can it be Orthodox? Can it be Christian? And the reality is, sometimes, yes, if you're going to a therapist or a psychiatrist and they don't respect that person, your beliefs, it can be a problem. So one of the questions that you have, and that's fine, it's a fit problem. It's like if you're making a new friend, you don't have to be friends with everybody you meet. In the screening problem, and part of what you can do as a servant is, hey, like the person that I'm going to send you or the person that's going to come see you is from a faith background. Do you respect that? Is that okay? Do you find that to be like a delusion? Is that crazy? There are people who tell you off the bat, like, you know what? I focus more on, like I'm not really about that. I focus more on other things, so I wouldn't be able to collaborate. We're actually working on a project to try to help churches in different cities have like a screening base in your area of providers. Even before your project comes to you, you can basically do this and help the person looking for care do it. Any facility you're going to go to, there's going to be some screening because they want to know if they want to treat you the same way that you want to know if you want to go to them. So part of the fit is to say, listen, we're from this Orthodox Christian community. This is important to us. We believe in medication. We believe in therapy. Is that a problem? Does that fit with your facility? If yes, then I would recommend, and it would be okay, to go to a non-Christian facility that can respect your beliefs. Why? Because if they're going to give you a part about medication, and they're going to give you a part strictly about things that would be better if they could pray over the medication, yes. Like I pray before I send a prescription, I do. And that's good. It's ideal, but if you don't have it, it would still be better in the pecking order of things to get someone treatment and you provide spiritual support. It would be almost like having different specialists, right? It would be better if you go to your internal medicine doctor who did a fellowship in cardiology and pulmonary and ID and all these things. But if you have one person who's going to address one thing and you'll address the other, that'll be sufficient. Does that make sense? So it's not that we go to anybody ever, because you're right, it is a real concern on both sides. But it can be addressed simply. So what we don't want to do is say like, all these people in mental health don't respect our faith. Not true. Or, everybody in mental health is like Mina Merhom. They all respect our faith and they're like servants in the church. Also not true. But somewhere in the middle. Why is the line with addiction where you should, where is the line with addiction where you should tell the parents versus you should keep the trust and deal with it yourself? Very good question. This could be tricky. And again, this is one of those things that's like better addressed on a case-by-case basis. I'll tell you this simple blanket statement. Ready? If you're on the fence and you don't know and you're worried, never worry alone. As a servant. Don't be like, I don't know, I'm worried, I think this kid might die. Well, let's pray about it. Let's see if they die or not. I don't know. Right? If you're worried about this question, then that's the time for sure. It's why we have a hierarchical church. Say, hey, head servant, hey, Abuna, I'm worried more about this kid. Should we have a discussion with their parents? Again, in confidence. In confidence, right? None of these people are going to go back and tell the kid. That's my go-to if you're worried. Versus if it's something ongoing and you're not really in the concern area of like telling their parents or having a strong, interject in a direct way, maintain the relationship of saying, okay, we're going to do a motivational kind of interviewing and I'm going to talk to you about change and we're going to be able to kind of work together, especially if it's a lost kid. You can't really help a lost kid if you don't have a relationship first. So let's say you build a relationship and the kid begins to feel like they can come into the fold. And now you're working through that. If you're seeing that you're not getting anywhere and there's a risk of feeling a danger, an immediate danger, you're thinking about having a discussion with first a senior servant in your line kind of hierarchy, and then potentially having a confidential discussion with the parents. Does that make sense? I know because it's like a case-by-case sort of tough thing, it's hard to answer blankly, but the big thing is that one of these things you should never worry about alone. And lastly, what if the patient is unwilling and it's not life-threatening? If I understand this right. Parent are unwilling or the patient is unwilling? Patient, okay. So if the patient or the kid is not willing, here's the thing, okay? I'll answer first like the opposite of that question. If it is life-threatening, then you have the option of taking emergent options, like we talked about. And calling 911, getting like emergency services involved right away. If it's not life-threatening, here's the unfortunate reality that we have about substance use, is you can't force people to treat. But you shouldn't be frustrated by that. We should more so, like we said before, about how God is dealing with us. This is where it's important for us to be patient and to be present. Like, you want to get help now? No. All right, well, let me know when you need help then. That's what you don't want to do, right? Sometimes that could be our inclination. Is like, the kid is doing the bad behavior. So they're going to continue doing the bad behavior, and you're going to wait for them, like, reach out to me when you're ready. No. If they're not ready for change yet, and it's not life-changing, now's the time for you to go full on in the relationship. Because here's the key for you, I want you to remember. Your involvement is treatment. Your involvement, your relationship is treatment. We sometimes think that treatment starts when they see a doctor. Wrong. It starts when they go to rehab. Wrong. Treatment starts way before that. Way before that. So if they're not ready for that kind of treatment, then you work on this kind of treatment. This kind of treatment is relationship, moving things along until they can be ready for that kind of treatment, and then you take it from there. Yes. Yeah.
So sometimes when you're developing that relationship, the kid kind of turns to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like you're in a situation, and like, yes, you can call other people, but then when you're not there, they're like lost all over again and like feeling the same way they did before and whatever. So how do you, and I don't think there's clear answer, but how do you like develop that like line or the boundaries? Like how do you put that up?
That's a very good question, actually. And it's both, at some point later, I would suggest having a discussion about personality disorders, both like in younger kids as well as like older kids too. And it's features in younger kids, but it happens. But the idea of boundaries is very important for us as servants, and I share this sometimes with friends of mine who are priests too, because it's very easy if you have someone who becomes just attached to you, that you become the center of their life. And you don't want to do that. You want, slowly, how boundaries get built is from the beginning. You establish what your role is in the person's life. I'm your servant. I'm there for you. However, here are the times where if you call me, I'm not available. And that's okay. If that happens, here's what you should do. Or here are times that if you're struggling with this is the kind of other team member that you can use. The reason why it's hard for us sometimes to do that is we also struggle with not being like, we like being like, they're like superhero servant, the Messiah who is like available at all times, right? And that's not healthy for us, it's not healthy for them. Like sometimes, forgive me, but like I'll hear some stories of like servants, like, oh, this servant like was never home, like he was like doing visitation until like midnight and like never saw their family. It was terrible. That's not healthy, that's terrible. That's not Christianity. I mean, not judging them, that's not Christianity, but that's not healthy for sure. Not healthy. So for us to be healthy servants who can model healthy behaviors for the kid, to be able to say, Habibi, I'm here for you. That doesn't mean that you literally hang on to me. Because what you're hanging on is Christ. You're hanging on to Christ always. And because you're hanging on to Christ, you can hang on to Christ in me a little bit, and a little bit of Christ in this servant, a little bit of Christ in this person, and a little bit in this person. But if I become your Jesus, bad news for you, I can't save you. So part of it sometimes is literally telling them that, telling them who you're depending on, and then how that Jesus who can save you is available in the person of several others. So it takes less pressure off of you, takes all the burden off, not all the burden, some of the burden on your shoulders, but also having a realistic healthy boundary relationship with them. That's based in love, but also based in like a healthy dynamic. Yes.
Become closer to the kids and you develop this relationship and you start to know the deep secrets of the family, and then you discover like things that are like bigger.
It's like
Yeah. Then you should maybe like know like like alcohol abuse or like drug abuse happening in the family. So then what do you do?
So it's a very good question. So there's two things, and this both happens like as servants as well as even like professionals in the field, right? There are some things that are important for you to know, and there are some things that are important for you to deflect and not have any relationship with. The kid can come and like gossip to you and tell you, guess what my aunt did? Like she punched my uncle in the face. Doesn't really help me. Like, wow, let's change subject. But there are some things, if now it's a good thing what you're describing in the beginning of like now you're being confided in and they're telling you the magnitude of issues in the family that require, again, like if I'm dealing with someone who has a cough, right? I can say, okay, a cough, here's what I can recommend for you, I can deal with it on my own. If that cough turns into lung cancer and pancreatic cancer, okay, now we need a whole bigger team. Now we need this and this and this and this because now this problem is way bigger than just an individual. So if that happens, that's actually a great thing because there's a good chance if that kid is confiding in you, he's not confiding in anybody else and saying, oh, there's like an alcohol use problem at home. And there is like physical abuse. And there is sexual abuse. Like just things really just... Now is the time to go back again and say, this is now more than just me as an individual. I know you trust in me, but I can work with you to say, we need more help. Like I'm there for you, I'm your servant. But we need to get some more people to help us here. And that more people can sometimes be, if there's again, this is the distinction, the dangerous distinction that we have. If there's a danger at home, you gotta be able to say, this involves law enforcement. I know it's dangerous, I know it's tough to say, and you don't necessarily have to jump to that with the kid. But I want you to be aware of it, because if a kid's life is in danger, even though you're not mandatory reporters, right? You're not healthcare professionals. But we have to know that there's a line that people oftentimes cross. Let me give you the example, okay? Where we don't want to mess up this. Is when people sometimes come to church and say, as a wife, that there's domestic violence, that the wife is being physically abused by the husband. And we say, how do it's okay, like, let's pray about it, right? And that person gets killed. Which like happened. Globally, in our church happened. So I bring to you the most severe example to say that like, I know we live in an environment of the church, but we're not isolated from the rest of the law-abiding world that we live in. But there are some things that that are not just sins, but that are illegal. If a kid is being abused at home, that is illegal, that's a crime. And we have to think about, we do it in wisdom. We do it in wisdom with like the rest of our church community, with Abuna, with the head servant. And these are the cases that are like, right, in every clinic, there's always like a high-risk community. There's a high-risk team. There are some things that you have to escalate to like the high-risk service team. You bring it up and say, okay, I'm worried here, there's a crime taking place, right? And we have to do something drastic, we have to do something big. If that happens, that's the way to address that. Because what we don't want to do is like, not everything is addressed just locally in the church. There are some things that break that barrier. And that's hard because it breaks confidence and stuff like that. But we're talking about people's lives, you know? And unfortunately, like there are Coptic kids who overdose on drugs, right? And there are life-threatening decisions that have to get made of saying, Habibi, I'm sorry. Like this is distinction, say with fire kind of move. We gotta go home, we gotta go to your home, and we gotta make a big move with your family because you're gonna die. You're gonna die. There are other kids, okay, you're smoking like a lot of weed, and we're gonna walk with you through to your pediatrician and use gabapentin. It's different. That's that distinction. So I encourage you to do two things. Maybe if nothing else, if that was a long-winded answer. Reach out locally in like the high-risk version. Reach out, like I offer myself to you guys as a resource as well. Reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss with you those kind of cases. Or another like professional in your church, someone with a psychiatric background that can say, hold on, It's dangerous. And it can be anonymous too. You don't have to say which kid it is, but I have a kid who has XYZ. I have a kid who has XYZ. What do? Do we step in big time? Or do we go kind of medium time? And if you have things on your mind today, I'm happy to discuss with you even today. We can turn off the thing and we can talk about any individual cases. I'm happy to do that. There's never been a time where I've given a talk in a church where there hasn't been people that said like, oh, I know someone, I have a friend. Everybody has a friend. Right? Does that help? Okay. Any other general questions? Thank you so much for your patience. This was a lot of patience for me. And like I said, I'll be around. If you have any individual friend questions, you can definitely join me. And I'll turn this off.